Rain hammered the window panes of Emily Bennett's small home in a quiet Portland suburb, blurring the edges of the outside world until it seemed to disappear entirely. Inside, the kitchen glowed with a faint yellow light, just enough to reveal the outlines of a life that felt paused. Emily, in her late 60s, sat at the table, her hands folded around a mug of cooling tea, a plate of untouched meatloaf pushed aside. The clock ticked loud in the hush. Framed photos lined the walls, her late husband laughing in the garden, a younger Emily beside a beaming daughter, and a faded image of a golden retriever whose warm brown eyes still haunted the corners of the house. The old dog had passed away the year before, a blow that had followed too closely after her husband's death. It was as if the universe had conspired to hollow her out, leaving only this echo of what used to be. Outside, thunder rolled, setting the house trembling. Emily's phone rang, slicing through her reverie. She jumped, her heart leaping, then froze when she saw her daughter Megan's name. For a moment she hovered, indecision flickering across her face before letting it go to voicemail. Her isolation felt nearly physical. She could hear it in the silence that returned after the ringtone faded. A second later the phone pinged again. Another voicemail, the latest in a string of messages Megan had been leaving for days. Emily pressed her fingers to her temples, willing away the persistent ache of loneliness. She was exhausted, but not from doing anything, rather, from the weight of all she was refusing to feel. Megan's voice on the machine was gentle but insistent, urging her to consider something Emily found nearly impossible: adopting a new dog. The idea made her chest tighten. How could she risk caring again, when every love seemed doomed to end in loss? She rose from the table, the floorboards creaking under her, and drifted through the empty house. Each room was a memory. In the hallway she paused to straighten a crooked picture of her husband, her hand lingering on the glass, tracing his smile. She whispered an apology into the darkness, not sure if she meant it for him or herself. That night, as the rain intensified and wind rattled the siding, Emily set her plate in the sink and leaned against the cool countertop. She stared at her own reflection in the window, a woman she barely recognized. Grief sat with her at the table, silent but insistent. She pressed her palm to her chest, feeling the familiar ache bloom. Suddenly, her knees buckled, and she slumped into a kitchen chair, silent tears spilling down her cheeks. She tried to muffle her sobs, embarrassed even in her own solitude, but the weight was too much. For the first time in months, she let herself cry. Not the careful, dignified tears she sometimes allowed, but deep, gasping sobs that seemed to come from somewhere ancient inside her. When she finally looked up, she saw the light blinking on her answering machine. Megan's latest message waited for her, just like hope itself, persistent, unwelcome, but always returning. Why did the idea of opening her heart again terrify her so deeply? Was it really the fear of loss, or was it the fear of discovering she still had something left to lose? The rain slowed and the house settled. Emily wiped her face and gathered herself. She poured the tea down the drain and set her mug in the dishwasher, moving through the rituals of bedtime on autopilot. But even as she lay down in her quiet, cavernous bedroom, the question lingered, gnawing at her edges. She pressed her face into the pillow, her heart heavy with longing for the days when the house was full of life. Sleep did not come easy. She drifted between memories, her mind conjuring the weight of a dog's head in her lap, the soft warmth of her husband's hand in hers. She wondered if she'd ever feel that comfort again. And the clock ticked into the early hours, rain pattering a steady lullaby. Somewhere in the house the old floorboards creaked, as if reminding her she was still here. Emily closed her eyes and let the darkness wash over her, promising herself that tomorrow, maybe, she'd listen to Megan's message. Maybe she'd consider the impossible. But for tonight, she would hold tight to the ache, a strange comfort in its own way, proof that her heart, battered and weary, was still beating. The next morning, gray clouds still clung to the sky, but the rain had faded to a mist. Emily awoke to the gentle, familiar trill of her phone. She groaned, pulling the blanket tighter, determined to ignore it, until Megan's name flashed again. This time, there was no avoiding her daughter's persistence. With a sigh, Emily answered. "Mom, I'm coming over," Megan said, her tone soft but unyielding. "You can argue with me when I get there." Within the hour, Megan's car pulled up outside. She swept into the house with a rush of damp air and lavender-scented hugs. Emily tried to protest, but Megan was already bustling about, pouring fresh coffee and tidying up as if she still lived there. The kitchen felt lighter with her presence, and for a moment, Emily allowed herself to be swept along. "Get dressed," Megan said, her voice gentle but resolute. "We're going out." Emily hesitated, but the look on her daughter's face brooked no argument. Megan helped her into a raincoat, slipped an arm through hers, and guided her to the car. The drive was quiet, the city sliding past in soft shades of gray. Emily watched the world outside with a detached ache, feeling as though she were moving underwater. When Megan finally parked, Emily's heart sank. The sign for the Portland Animal Shelter loomed ahead, bright and hopeful. The moment she stepped inside, the world exploded into chaos. Barking, howling, the sharp scent of disinfectant, the clatter of metal gates. Dozens of dogs, each with their own story, pressed against their enclosures, desperate for attention or escape. The noise set Emily's nerves on edge. She clung to Megan's arm, her hand trembling. They moved slowly down the rows of kennels, Megan whispering encouragement. Emily could barely hear her above the din. Her eyes darted, never settling on any one animal. She felt exposed, on display herself, every emotion threatening to spill over. As they reached the far corner, the commotion seemed to fade. There, behind the last gate, sat a German shepherd, silent, poised, regal even amid the chaos. His coat was a striking mix of black and tan, his eyes impossibly intelligent and calm. Unlike the other dogs, he didn't bark or pace. He simply watched, ears perked, his gaze following every movement in the room. Something about him made Emily pause. Just then, a shelter volunteer approached. He was in his mid-40s, with gentle eyes and a calm, quiet presence that reminded Emily of the teachers she'd once worked with. "That's Atlas," he said, smiling at Emily's curiosity. "He's special." Emily glanced at his name tag. "Ben." Megan squeezed her mother's arm. "Can we meet him?" Ben nodded and unlocked the gate. Atlas stepped forward, not rushing, but moving with a steady confidence. He stopped just in front of Emily, sitting so their eyes met. For a moment everything else faded, the noise, the fear, the ache of old losses. There was a gravity in the dog's gaze, something that demanded honesty. Ben knelt beside Atlas, scratching behind his ears. His owner was an elderly man, lived alone just like you. Had to move to assisted living. Atlas has been here a few weeks, doesn't cause trouble. He just waits. Emily found her voice, barely more than a whisper. "How old is he?" 6, maybe 7. "He's still got years ahead of him." Ben looked from Atlas to Emily, his expression kind but searching. "He's loyal, steady. I think he'd do well in a quiet home." Megan's hand found Emily's. "Mom, just spend a few minutes with him. Please." With a deep, trembling breath, Emily reached out. Atlas lifted his head, gently pressing his nose into her palm. His fur was warm and soft, his breathing slow and steady. For a long moment, Emily and Atlas simply existed together, the world narrowing to the space between them. She felt something unspoken pass from his gaze into her heart. A wordless understanding of loss, and a flicker of hope. Ben stood quietly, giving them space. "You don't have to decide right now," he said softly. "But sometimes, it's the ones who wait quietly that make the biggest difference." Emily swallowed hard, emotions warring inside her. She wanted to run, to escape the risk of opening her heart again. But the calm presence of Atlas tugged at something deep within her, something she thought was lost for good. Megan stepped back, giving her mother space. Emily knelt, ignoring the stiffness in her knees, and looked Atlas in the eyes. "What do you think, old boy?" she whispered. "Could we learn to trust each other?" Atlas didn't move, but his tail thumped softly on the floor, his eyes never leaving hers. Suddenly, Emily's resistance wavered. For so long, her life had been ruled by fear, of pain, of change, of loving and losing again. Yet here was a creature who had known loss himself, and still waited with hope. Emily felt a tear slip down her cheek, but this time, it wasn't only from sadness. She glanced at Megan, who watched with tears shining in her own eyes. Ben offered a gentle smile, sensing the moment. The decision hung in the air, weighty and terrifying, but also full of promise. Emily stood, brushing her hands on her jeans, and nodded. "Let's try," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Just for a few days." Ben grinned, relief and pride mingling on his face. Megan squeezed her mother's shoulder, her expression soft with love. As they walked to the front desk, Atlas at Emily's side, she felt the faintest stirring of hope, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The world outside was still gray, but for the first time since her losses, Emily felt a sliver of light break through. She was taking a risk, one that terrified her, but in Atlas's quiet presence, she sensed the possibility of healing. What Emily didn't know, as she left the shelter with her new companion, was that this moment would change the course of both their lives. The decision to let Atlas in was not the end of her grief, but perhaps, finally, the beginning of something new. The drive home with Atlas was quiet, both in the car and in Emily's chest. Megan offered cheerful encouragement as she navigated through the city's rainy streets, but Emily barely heard her, lost in a jumble of anxiety and guilt. Atlas sat in the back seat, pressed against the door, as calm as he'd been in the shelter, watchful, not making a sound. When they reached Emily's modest house, Megan insisted on helping carry Atlas's bed, a bag of donated toys, and a tin of food into the living room. Emily watched her daughter's practiced motions and felt a wave of helplessness. Was she really prepared for this? Her home, so long a museum of memories and loss, suddenly felt too small for all these new things. Atlas entered with quiet dignity, sniffing at the corners, tail swaying, exploring at his own pace. Emily hovered in the hallway, unsure whether to follow him or give him space. Her old dog's favorite spot by the fireplace flashed in her memory, making her chest ache. "Just let him settle in, Mom," Megan said gently, squeezing her hand before heading out. "Call me if you need anything. Really, anything." As soon as the door closed, the silence pressed back in, heavier than ever. Atlas padded into the kitchen, giving Emily a tentative glance before lying down at her feet. She stepped aside awkwardly, suddenly self-conscious, and busied herself with small chores, wiping counters, sorting the mail, organizing her late husband's old mugs on the shelf. She found herself avoiding the living room, where Atlas had curled up on the old rug, his head resting on his paws, eyes following her every move. The hours passed slowly. Emily reheated a bowl of soup, but couldn't finish it, her appetite lost somewhere between worry and habit. She turned on the radio for background noise, but the chatter of voices only heightened her discomfort. Every so often, she'd catch Atlas's gaze and quickly look away, afraid of the strange, deep recognition she saw there. That evening, as dusk seeped into the house, Emily found herself pacing. She tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. Eventually, she settled into her favorite armchair, well-worn and faded, the place she'd spent countless nights reading to her husband and later whispering her grief into the emptiness. Atlas rose from his spot and wandered over. He didn't whine, didn't nudge for attention. Instead, he simply sat beside her, close but not touching, his body radiating quiet patience. Emily gripped the arms of her chair, feeling the urge to reach out but unable to bridge the gap. After a while, Atlas gently rested his head on her knee. His fur was warm, the weight of him oddly grounding. For a split second, Emily almost relaxed. But then she stiffened, as if afraid that any crack in her armor would bring the past flooding back. She whispered a shaky good night and shuffled to her bedroom, leaving Atlas to sleep alone in the living room. The house felt cavernous as she closed the door behind her. In the quiet darkness, Emily's mind raced. Was she doing the right thing, bringing this dog into her grief? Was she being selfish or foolish for thinking she could ever move on? Sleep eluded her. Instead, she lay awake, listening to the wind against the window and, beneath it, the soft, rhythmic breathing of Atlas from the hallway. The sound soothed her more than she wanted to admit, and for the first time since her husband's passing, she felt something almost like comfort, but it was laced with fear. Fear of needing, of hoping, of losing again. The next morning, the awkwardness continued. Atlas followed Emily from room to room, a silent shadow. She made breakfast and, without thinking, set a scrap of bacon on a plate for him. He accepted it gently, sitting back with calm gratitude. There was no expectation in his eyes, just a steady, watchful loyalty. Days stretched into a gentle pattern of unease. Emily spent her hours cleaning, reorganizing drawers, making lists of errands she never intended to run. Atlas, for his part, remained quietly present, neither demanding affection nor shying away. He watched her with patient eyes, sometimes curling up at her feet, sometimes trailing just a few steps behind. One afternoon, as rain tapped lightly on the roof, Emily sat by the window, staring at her overgrown garden. She remembered how her husband used to coax tomatoes from the stingiest patches of earth, and how their golden retriever would chase squirrels until his tongue lolled. The ache of those memories pressed on her chest, and tears threatened again. She blinked them away, but Atlas, sensing her mood, quietly approached and sat beside her. He didn't try to climb into her lap or lick her face. Instead, he offered his silent company, breathing slow and deep, as if encouraging her to do the same. Emily let her hand drift to his head, stroking his fur tentatively. Atlas leaned into her touch, his tail sweeping softly against the floor, but still made no demands. That night, Emily left her bedroom door cracked open. She couldn't admit it to herself, but the sound of Atlas's breathing had become a kind of lullaby, a reminder that she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. She drifted into sleep more easily, comforted by the quiet presence in the next room. In the days that followed, Emily began to notice little things, the way Atlas always kept her in his line of sight, the gentle tap of his paw when she seemed sad, the way he'd sit beside her as she folded laundry or prepared dinner. He never barked for attention, never pushed her boundaries, but instead mirrored her reserved nature, offering support without pressure. Emily's defenses remained, but something inside her began to soften. One morning she caught herself humming as she made coffee, a small, nearly forgotten pleasure. Atlas wagged his tail, watching her with warm eyes, and she felt a flutter of hope, delicate and uncertain. But for every step forward, there was hesitation, a fear that opening up would only invite more pain. Emily knew she was still haunted by the echoes of loss. Yet, as she watched Atlas stretch out in a patch of sunlight, she realized she wasn't alone in her quiet trial. They were both learning, step by tentative step, how to trust again. Days passed in a blur of drizzle and quiet routines. Emily moved through them as if underwater, her world still draped in gray. The house felt unchanged on the surface, yet everything was different. Atlas's steady presence filled every empty space. His gentle paws on the hardwood, the soft jingling of his collar, the warmth he radiated when he lay by the fireplace. But the wall inside Emily, the one grief had built, still stood. Megan stopped by often, her concern thinly disguised behind cheerful updates and bags of groceries. She'd drop off flowers, set a fresh loaf of bread on the counter, and ask about Atlas with a hopeful smile. "How's he doing, Mom? Have you taken him for a walk yet?" Emily would nod or mumble a vague answer, unwilling to admit that she hadn't left the block in weeks. Even the smallest outing felt like too much. Atlas tried in his own ways. He'd bring her a slipper from the bedroom, nudge her hand gently with his nose when she was lost in thought, or curl up on her feet as she read the newspaper. At first, Emily stiffened at these small gestures. torn between a need for connection and the fear that any bond would just become another loss. The old sorrow never seemed far away. At night, when rain drummed on the roof, memories surfaced with a sharpness that made her flinch. She'd remember her husband's laugh echoing down the hall, the muddy footprints their old golden retriever used to leave by the door, the chaos and laughter of family holidays now gone silent. Sometimes she'd catch herself staring at an empty chair and feel the urge to call a name that no one would answer. One afternoon, as she sat at the kitchen table, sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Atlas lay quietly nearby, eyes closed but ears alert, always tuned to her. Emily watched him, envy and longing twisting inside her. How could he stay so present, so patient? Didn't he know how quickly happiness could vanish? The answer came unexpectedly. That evening, as twilight deepened and Emily poured herself a small glass of wine, she found Atlas watching her from the doorway. His gaze was calm, unjudging. Without thinking, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I used to talk to my husband every night, told him about my day, the things that scared me, the silly dreams I had. When he died, I stopped talking. Just stopped. Her throat tightened, words catching. Then we lost Max, our old dog, and I thought, what's the point? Why open your heart if everything just leaves? Atlas rose and crossed the room, sitting at her feet. Emily reached out, her hand trembling, and placed it on his head. His fur was warm and alive under her fingers. You're different, she whispered, her voice breaking. You just listen. You don't try to fix anything. Maybe that's what I need. Tears welled up, spilling quietly onto her cheeks. She let them come this time, not fighting the sorrow, but letting it move through her. Atlas stayed close, his head bowed in silent solidarity. For the first time in ages, Emily didn't feel embarrassed by her grief. She just felt human. Later that night, as Emily sat in her favorite chair by the window, she caught herself wishing for connection. It surprised her, this longing. She realized with a shock that what had held her back all this time wasn't only sadness. It was the fear of being hurt again, the fear of needing someone, of loving them, and then having to let go. Atlas, sensing her shift, nudged his nose under her hand. Emily smiled through her tears, running her fingers gently through his fur. Maybe I can try, she said softly. Just a little. In the days that followed, the world inside Emily began to change in small but important ways. She let Atlas accompany her to the mailbox. She started making real dinners again, not just soup from a can. Sometimes she'd catch herself humming as she cleaned, a habit from happier times. These were small victories, but they mattered. She found herself talking to Atlas more often, telling him stories about her late husband, about her daughter's childhood, about Max and the chaos he brought to their home. Atlas listened with the same calm patience, never interrupting, never judging. Emily realized she was starting to heal, not by forgetting the past, but by letting herself remember it without breaking. One evening, Megan stopped by to find Emily and Atlas in the backyard. Emily was laughing as Atlas rolled in the grass, the sound bright and clear in the evening air. Megan's eyes shone with relief. It's good to see you smile again, Mom. Emily looked up, her heart unexpectedly light. He's good company, she said simply. Quiet, but good. Megan knelt beside Atlas, scratching behind his ears. He loves you, Mom. You know that, right? Emily nodded, her eyes misty. I'm starting to believe it. The wall of sorrow was still there, but cracks had begun to show. Atlas's unwavering loyalty, his gentle nature, had started to chip away at Emily's defenses. She wasn't ready to call it hope yet, but for the first time she could see the possibility. She could feel life, stubborn and persistent, making its way back into her heart, guided by the patient presence of a dog who asked for nothing but a chance to belong. That night, The wind whipped rain against Emily's windows with unusual force, rattling the panes as if the whole house were trying to shake itself free from memory. Emily moved through her bedtime routine on autopilot, her body heavy, her mind drifting in and out of recollections. She paused at her husband's photograph in the hallway, brushing a finger across the glass, her heart aching with a familiar loneliness. Atlas padded quietly behind her, ever present, a soft shadow in the lamplight. She'd grown used to his gentle company, the way he'd lie by her feet as she read, or sit beside her at the table as she picked at dinner. Tonight, though, her sadness felt particularly raw, pressing on her ribs, weighing down every step. In the kitchen, Emily filled a glass of water, her slippers skimming across the rug. Her thoughts tangled in the past, her husband's laughter echoing down the hall, her daughter's childhood footsteps, the jangle of Max's collar as he bounded into the room. She didn't see the corner of the rug curling up beneath her foot. It happened in an instant, a slip, a sharp gasp, the glass shattering against the floor as she tumbled down, her hip colliding hard with the unforgiving tile. Pain exploded through her side, hot and blinding, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She tried to move, to sit up, but agony shot up her leg, pinning her in place. The kitchen lights spun overhead. Emily lay there, shivering, the world narrowing to pain and panic. Atlas whined from the doorway, paws skittering across the tiles as he rushed to her side. She wanted to reassure him, to say something gentle, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she wept, deep, body-shaking sobs that weren't just for her injury, but for all the years that had slipped away while she was busy missing everything she'd lost. Atlas circled her anxiously, his nose pressed to her cheek, his breath warm against her skin. She could hear his worried whimpers, feel his desperate need to help. For the first time, she let herself lean into him, clinging to his fur as if he were the only solid thing in her world. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, though her voice shook. "I'm here. I just can't." The pain clouded her mind, but even in her fear, she noticed Atlas's focus. He studied her face, then her outstretched arm, fingers grasping for the cordless phone that had fallen just out of reach. He paused only a second before springing into action, nudging the phone closer with his nose, careful not to press any buttons. When Emily fumbled, he gently took the phone strap in his mouth, dragging it to her hand until her fingers closed around it. Tears streamed down Emily's face, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She'd never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. But in that moment, something shifted. She realized she could trust Atlas with more than her daily routines. She could trust him with her safety, her life. With trembling hands, Emily dialed Megan. The phone rang, every second stretching impossibly long. When Megan answered, Emily's voice cracked, fear rising to the surface. "Sweetheart, I fell. I can't get up. Please hurry." Megan's voice came through frantic and tight. "Stay calm, Mom. I'm coming. I'll call for help. Hang on. Stay on the line with me." Emily pressed the phone to her ear, her breath ragged. Atlas lay down beside her, pressing his body close, his presence a lifeline in the storm of her panic. She focused on the steady thud of his heart, the rise and fall of his chest, anchoring herself in his calm. The pain was sharp, but it felt less lonely with Atlas there. Minutes crawled by. Emily drifted in and out of awareness, the pain and fear overwhelming her. She tried to picture Megan's face, to remind herself that help was on the way. But it was Atlas's steady eyes that kept her grounded. He licked away her tears, nudged her hand when she whimpered, never leaving her side. As the sounds of sirens pierced the night, relief washed over her, tinged with exhaustion. She squeezed Atlas's neck, whispering, "You're a good boy, Atlas. I'm so lucky you're here." For the first time, the words felt true, not just an attempt at gratitude, but a deep acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. The paramedics arrived, the room filling with bright lights and purposeful voices. Megan rushed in a moment later, dropping to her knees at Emily's side, tears streaking her face. Emily tried to reassure her, but Megan only held her tighter, her voice trembling. "I'm here, Mom. I'm here. As the paramedics lifted Emily onto a stretcher, Atlas whined anxiously, following every movement, refusing to be left behind. Megan stroked his head, whispering, "It's okay, Atlas. She'll be all right." Emily caught her daughter's eye, her own gaze brimming with gratitude and something new, an acceptance of her own vulnerability, and the strange, beautiful truth that she didn't have to carry her pain alone. What would you do if you found yourself alone and injured in your own home, with only a dog to rely on? Do you think you could trust an animal with your life in a moment like this? Let me know in the comments below. Have you ever had a pet come to your rescue, or do you think you would react the same way as Emily? And keep listening, because what happens next will change Emily's life forever. That night would be a turning point. Not just because Emily had fallen, but because for the first time she had allowed herself to fully lean on someone, even if that someone was a dog. In the darkness of her kitchen, pain and fear swirling around her, Emily learned that real trust grows not from absence of need, but from the courage to let another living soul in. The world outside Emily's window was still streaked with rain the next morning, but in the hospital room, there was only stillness, a strange, sterile hush broken by the soft beep of machines and the occasional distant murmur of footsteps in the hallway. Emily opened her eyes to the unfamiliar glare of fluorescent lights, her mind foggy with painkillers and fatigue. For a moment she felt adrift, caught between the echo of last night's fear and the cold certainty of her aching hip. She looked around, disoriented, and panic fluttered in her chest until she saw Megan curled up in the bedside chair, eyes rimmed red, but face soft with relief. "Hey, Mom," Megan whispered, reaching for her hand. "You're okay. The doctor said it's just a bad bruise, not broken, but you'll need to rest." Emily tried to sit up, but the ache in her hip pinned her down. "Atlas! Where's Atlas?" she asked, her voice breaking with sudden urgency. Megan gave a shaky smile. "He's at home." Ben from the shelter offered to check in on him. He wouldn't leave the door all night after the ambulance left, just lay there waiting for you. He's a good dog, Mom." Hearing those words, Emily closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Relief mixed with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude that someone, even a dog, could care that much. For so long, she'd convinced herself that needing anyone was weakness. But Atlas's faithfulness had shattered that old belief in a single, terrifying night. The hours crept by slowly. Nurses came and went, checking her vitals, adjusting her blankets. Megan fussed over her with gentle authority, promising to stay as long as Emily needed. Yet through it all, Emily's thoughts returned again and again to Atlas, his eyes, his warmth, the unspoken promise he had given her. She wondered if he was eating, if he missed her, if he would forgive her for being gone. By afternoon, Ben arrived, holding a small bag of Emily's favorite pastries and news from home. "Atlas is all right," he assured her, sitting at her bedside. "Ate his breakfast, walked the yard, then came right back to your front door. He's waiting for you, Emily, like he knows you'll be back." Emily smiled at Ben, comforted by his quiet presence. There was something grounding about Ben, his calm voice, the way he listened without judgment. In a world that had become so unpredictable, he and Atlas were becoming steady fixtures, anchoring her to hope. That evening, the doctor entered with a clipboard and a kindly, no-nonsense expression. "Good news, no fracture, just a severe bruise, but you'll need a walker for a bit, and someone to help out at home. I'll set up home care, but you can go home tomorrow if you promise to rest." Emily nodded, grateful to be returning to the only place that felt like hers. Megan squeezed her hand, her eyes brightening. "We'll manage, Mom. I'll stay as long as you need. And Ben's offered to help too." It was late the next morning when Megan wheeled Emily up the front walk. The moment the key turned in the lock, Atlas's barking erupted on the other side, a desperate, joyous sound. As the door swung open, Atlas bounded forward, tail wagging, ears perked, nearly knocking Megan aside in his rush to get to Emily. Emily reached down with trembling hands, tears sliding silently down her cheeks as Atlas pressed his head to her lap, whining softly, as if checking to be sure she was really home. She sank her fingers into his fur, overwhelmed by relief and love. "I missed you too," she whispered. "You're my good boy, my hero." Ben appeared in the doorway, smiling at the reunion. "He's barely left that spot since you left, Emily. I had to bribe him outside for even a minute." Megan set up the walker and helped her mother inside. The house felt different now, less like a tomb, more like a place where healing could happen. Atlas stuck close, following Emily's every move, his eyes always on her, ready to assist at any moment. The days that followed were difficult but different than before. Emily had to rely on Megan for even the smallest tasks. Getting dressed, moving from room to room, cooking simple meals. Ben stopped by each afternoon to help with groceries and offer quiet company. At first, Emily struggled with frustration and embarrassment. She hated feeling helpless, hated asking for help. But whenever shame crept in, she would find Atlas waiting by her side, offering his silent loyalty. He became her shadow, fetching slippers, standing guard at the shower door, nudging her arm gently whenever he sensed her spirits sinking. There were setbacks, sleepless nights when pain kept Emily awake, afternoons when she snapped at Megan or Ben, guilty and impatient. But there were also moments of unexpected joy. Megan caught Emily smiling. Really smiling, as Atlas chased a squeaky toy through the hallway. One morning, Ben found mother and daughter laughing over burnt toast, the kitchen bright with a warmth that had been missing for years. Atlas's devotion never wavered. When Emily winced in pain, he'd nuzzle her hand or curl up at her feet, refusing to leave until she felt safe again. The trust between them deepened with every passing day. Emily found herself talking to him as she struggled through physical therapy, sharing her doubts and dreams in the quiet spaces of the afternoon. Atlas listened, always listening, his eyes steady and kind. In those first fragile days home, Emily realized something vital. Her survival hadn't been a solitary act. It was the result of a web of care, Megan's fierce love, Ben's steady help, Atlas's unwavering loyalty. For the first time since her husband's passing, Emily didn't feel like she was carrying her burdens alone. She leaned back in her chair one evening, Atlas's head in her lap, Megan and Ben chatting softly nearby. The storm outside had passed. In its place was a hush, a new kind of quiet, not the emptiness she'd known for so long, but a peacefulness built on trust, connection, and the second chance she'd never thought she'd take. The first days home blurred together in a slow, careful dance. Emily, propped up by her walker, moved gingerly through the house while Megan shadowed her with anxious devotion, and Ben stopped by each afternoon with groceries, stories, or simply his quiet presence. But the constant thread through every moment was Atlas. The German shepherd was no longer just a guest. He was Emily's constant companion, a living heartbeat anchoring her to each new day. Atlas took to his role with quiet dignity. He padded softly beside Emily as she shuffled from room to room, always keeping just close enough to offer support, but never underfoot. In the mornings, he'd nudge her elbow at breakfast, his soft eyes asking nothing more than to share the gentle start of another day. When Emily practiced her physical therapy, slowly flexing her stiff hip and stretching sore muscles, Atlas would fetch the small rubber ball Megan had given him, setting it on her lap with a hopeful glint. Sometimes, he'd even drop a slipper or a crumpled washcloth as if to say, "See? You're not the only one relearning how to move." The awkwardness that once filled the house began to soften. Emily found herself speaking aloud more often, not just to Megan or Ben, but to Atlas. She told him stories from her teaching days, recounted old family memories, or simply narrated her thoughts as she struggled with her walker or sat by the kitchen window. Atlas responded in his gentle, wordless ways, a lean against her leg, a nuzzle of her hand, a thump of his tail. In these simple moments, trust took root. One rainy afternoon, Megan brought over an old box of photographs. "Thought you might want these, Mom. We never really finished sorting after Dad," after everything changed. Emily hesitated, the weight of the past pressing on her, but Atlas settled at her feet, his warmth steadying her. Together, mother and daughter flipped through memories, faded pictures of a sunlit wedding, a tiny Megan with missing front teeth, a much younger Emily with her husband and their first dog tumbling through the grass. When Emily's eyes filled with tears, it was Atlas who licked her hand, reminding her that sadness and comfort could live side by side. She wiped her eyes, managing a watery smile. "It hurts, but it feels good to remember," she whispered. Megan hugged her. Atlas pressed close, and for the first time, the three of them sat together in their shared vulnerability. As the days brightened and Emily regained strength, Atlas became more than a helper. He became her partner in small adventures. She started cooking again, determined to reclaim routines she'd abandoned. At first, she stuck to simple meals: scrambled eggs, soup, toast. Atlas watched every step, waiting patiently for the chance to lick the spoon or catch a dropped carrot. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Emily soon found herself inviting Megan and Ben over for dinner. One evening, as sunlight painted the kitchen golden, Emily and Megan cooked together, Emily at the counter with her walker, Megan chopping vegetables by the sink. Atlas supervised from his spot on the rug, ears perked, eyes following every movement. Ben arrived with fresh bread, and soon the house was filled with laughter, the sound bouncing off the walls in a way that felt startlingly new. After dinner, as they cleared the dishes, Atlas chased his squeaky toy down the hallway, skidding across the wood floor and bumping into Emily's walker. She laughed loud and true, and Megan joined in, shaking her head. "He's a clown, Mom. I think he knows he's making you smile." Emily grinned, bending to scratch Atlas behind the ears. "He's more than that," she said quietly. "He's teaching me how to start over." As summer crept into Portland, Emily began to open the curtains, letting sunlight flood the rooms that had long been shrouded in shadow. She and Atlas took short walks down the block, the German shepherd pacing beside her like a vigilant guard. Neighbors stopped to chat, some bringing treats for Atlas, others marveling at Emily's progress. Each encounter was a small step back into the world, a gentle invitation to participate in life again. The bond between Emily and Atlas deepened in the quiet spaces of their days. The soft hush of dawn, the rhythmic thump of his tail during a midday nap, the silent comfort he offered during sleepless nights. Atlas was no longer just a reason to get out of bed. He was the spark that lit the path forward. One Sunday, Megan brought over a new puzzle, hoping to coax her mother into an old favorite hobby. Emily hesitated, self-doubt whispering in her ear, but Atlas settled beside her, nose on the table, eyes bright with curiosity. Megan grinned, placing a piece in her mother's hand. "If you get stuck, just ask Atlas. I'm pretty sure he's smarter than both of us." They worked together for hours, the simple rhythm of matching shapes and colors soothing something raw in Emily's chest. She marveled at how natural it felt to laugh, to try, to not be perfect. With Atlas beside her, she didn't need to be. By the end of the week, Emily realized she was changing, not just physically, but in ways she hadn't thought possible. She reached out to friends she hadn't spoken to in years, invited Megan and Ben to stay longer after dinner, and even let herself daydream about future holidays filled with warmth rather than sorrow. All along, Atlas remained her constant, his loyalty unwavering, his love a quiet force. In learning to care for him, Emily learned to care for herself again. Every day, with every small victory, trust and hope grew. The walls she had built around her heart began to fall, not with a crash, but with the gentle persistence of a dog who believed, against all odds, that she was worth the effort. The air in Portland warmed and softened as spring edged toward summer. It was a morning brushed with sunlight when Megan appeared at Emily's door with a fresh challenge. "I signed us up to volunteer at the shelter, Mom. Just one morning a week," she said, flashing a hopeful smile. Emily started to protest, but Atlas nudged her knee, tail wagging, and in that moment, resistance felt silly. If Atlas could embrace the unknown, maybe she could too. On their first day, Emily hesitated on the shelter's threshold, her chest tight with anxiety. The place was still chaotic, dogs barking, the scent of bleach lingering, volunteers bustling around. But she had Atlas by her side, his calm presence steadying her heart. Megan squeezed her hand. "We're just here to help, and maybe to give someone else a second chance." They were assigned to the back kennels where the shyest dogs were kept, the ones too anxious for the front row, the ones who trembled when strangers approached. Emily watched as Atlas greeted each dog with gentle curiosity, never rushing, letting them come to him. His patience was contagious. Soon, Emily found herself crouching beside a cowering terrier, speaking in the soft, soothing voice she'd used for nervous students years before. She remembered Ben's story of how Atlas had been surrendered, an old man forced into assisted living, the heartbreak of saying goodbye. That loss still echoed in Atlas's steady, searching gaze. Emily realized that just like her, he'd survived by waiting, hoping, believing that connection was possible again. Volunteering became part of their rhythm. Every week, Emily felt herself growing lighter, her steps quicker. She brushed fur from sleepy hounds, refilled water bowls, shared gentle words and warm touches with dogs that flinched at sudden movements. With Atlas at her side, she became something new, a bridge for wounded animals, a safe place for them to try again. One morning she watched as an elderly woman inched down the row of kennels, her face pinched with nerves. The woman paused at the farthest cage, where a battered gray mutt cowered in the shadows. "He reminds me of my old dog," she whispered, tears shining. Emily knelt beside her, offering a reassuring hand. "Sometimes we don't realize how much love we still have left," she said, her own voice thick with memory. "But there's always a little more, waiting for the right moment." As the woman and the gray mutt sat quietly together, Emily flashed back to her first silent connection with Atlas. She caught Megan watching her with pride, and Ben, now a regular at the shelter, grinned from the doorway, his arms folded as if protecting something precious. Their story, the widow and the loyal shepherd, began to ripple through the community. A reporter from the local paper interviewed Emily, asking about her journey. She told the truth. "I thought I was rescuing Atlas, but the truth is, he rescued me." The article ran with a picture of the two of them. Emily's hand resting on Atlas's head, both of them looking out at a world filled with new possibilities. Inspired, Emily and Atlas helped launch a senior pet adoption campaign, visiting churches, community centers, even Emily's old school. Emily spoke with quiet conviction about the overlooked magic in older animals, their patience, their gratitude, the gentle way they healed the hearts of people who believed their best days were behind them. With Megan and Ben by her side, Emily found herself invited to speak at small gatherings. At first, her voice shook with nerves, but Atlas would nudge her leg and remind her to breathe. She watched as people listened, some wiping away tears, others nodding in recognition. After every talk, someone would approach with their own story of loss or hope, or the silent longing for connection. Emily listened, offering comfort not just as a volunteer, but as someone who had been broken and rebuilt by the love of a dog. One Saturday, the shelter held an adoption event in a sunlit park. Colorful banners fluttered, children raced between tents, and dogs of all shapes and sizes trotted at their handlers' sides. Emily watched Atlas play with a group of children, his tail wagging, his mouth open in a happy dog grin. She looked around and saw faces she now knew, neighbors, shelter staff, newly adopted families. The loneliness she'd worn for so long had dissolved, replaced by a sense of belonging. During the event, Emily stood on a makeshift stage, Atlas sitting obediently at her feet. She spoke softly to the crowd, her voice carrying further than she imagined. "Grief can turn your heart to stone, but love, especially the unexpected kind, can turn it back to flesh. Atlas taught me that healing is slow, sometimes messy, but always worth it." She stepped down, her heart pounding, to find Ben and Megan waiting with wide smiles. Ben squeezed her hand. "You're a natural, Emily. You're giving so many people hope." As the day faded into gold and pink, Emily took a long breath, the park humming with laughter and barks. Atlas leaned into her leg and she knew, deep in her bones, that she was finally home, not just in her house but in the world. There was peace now and belonging and a quiet pride in the bridge she and Atlas had built between loneliness and love, between old scars and new beginnings. That night, as she watched Atlas doze at her feet, Emily whispered, "Thank you for finding me." And she realized, with a burst of gratitude, that every act of reaching out, no matter how small, had the power to change not just her own life, but the lives of so many others longing for connection. On a soft Sunday morning, the city's noise distant and gentle, Emily sat at her kitchen table, a mug of tea warming her hands. Atlas rested nearby, chin on his paws, eyes half closed in the mellow light. Megan and Ben would be over soon, but for now the house was quiet, a peaceful hush, not the suffocating silence it once had been. Outside, the garden was alive again. Lilies her husband once planted pushed through the earth, their yellow blossoms like promises kept. It was in these still moments that Emily found herself reflecting on how far she'd come. There had been a time when grief built its fortress around her heart, a wall she thought would never crack. She'd lived in the shadow of loss, refusing comfort, refusing to risk joy again. She could see it now, the pattern of her own fear, how it had kept her from the very things that made life worth living. Atlas stirred, lifting his head, and Emily smiled, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "You know, you taught me more than I ever thought a dog could," she murmured. His tail thumped softly against the floor, and she knew he understood in his own way. She thought about that night on the kitchen floor, the night her defenses finally gave way. It had been terror that cracked her open, but what followed was a revelation. She didn't have to do it all alone, relying on Atlas, trusting Megan and Ben, letting people help. These weren't failures, but acts of courage. Accepting help was not weakness, it was an opening, a chance to let life flow back in. Later that day, Emily attended a meeting at a local support group for people facing loneliness and loss. It was held in a modest room at the community center, folding chairs arranged in a circle. Atlas came too, wearing his blue therapy dog bandana, something Emily never imagined he'd earn, or that she'd have the confidence to help him get. She listened as others shared their stories, a widower struggling to make sense of empty days, a young woman facing her first year without her mother, a man who'd lost his job and felt invisible in his own home. As each person spoke, Emily felt the echoes of her own pain and the ache of old scars. When it was her turn, she took a breath and let her gaze settle on Atlas before she spoke. "For a long time, I thought healing meant moving on, forgetting the pain, pushing it aside. But I've learned something different," she began, her voice steady but soft. "Grief is like a tide. It comes and goes, sometimes gentle, sometimes overwhelming. I tried to build walls against it, but all that did was keep out everything else. Joy, hope, even love." She paused, meeting the eyes of those gathered. "Atlas came into my life when I thought I was done opening my heart. I was scared, terrified really, that loving him would just bring more pain. But what I found was that letting myself need again, letting myself be needed, was the start of healing." The room was quiet, save for Atlas's quiet breathing. Emily's words hung in the air, real and raw. "We don't heal by forgetting what we've lost. We heal by honoring it, by letting it become part of who we are, but not all that we are. Love isn't about replacing what's gone. It's about making space for something new, something unexpected." Several people nodded, tears glinting in their eyes. One woman reached over to squeeze Emily's hand. A man wiped his face, a grateful smile trembling on his lips. Atlas, sensing the emotion in the room, moved from person to person, leaning into gentle hands, offering comfort without words. After the meeting, Emily lingered in the parking lot, chatting quietly with others. She listened, really listened, to their hopes and worries. "You give me hope," one woman said. "If you could open your heart again, maybe I can too." Emily felt a surge of pride, gentle, steady, and entirely new. Back at home, she found Megan on the porch, sipping coffee and chatting with Ben about an upcoming adoption event. The sight filled Emily with warmth. She realized that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped surviving and started living again. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Emily settled on the back steps with Atlas. The world felt different now, more vivid, more possible. She thought about the journey they'd taken, from a house haunted by memories and grief to one filled with laughter, light, and love. Emily knew that the pain of loss would never fully disappear. There would always be days when her husband's memory hit her like a wave, or when the ache of old goodbyes crept up unexpectedly. But now, those moments no longer drowned her. She had learned to carry her scars with pride, not as marks of weakness, but as signs of her courage to love, to trust, to begin again. She turned to Atlas, running her hand along his back. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you for teaching me how to let life in again." In that golden hour, with Atlas by her side and laughter echoing from the kitchen, Emily understood the most profound lesson of all. Healing began not when she brought Atlas home, but when she finally allowed herself to need and to be needed again. And in that openness, she found a purpose far greater than she'd ever imagined, one built on connection, on second chances, and on the quiet, unbreakable bond between a woman and her dog. Seasons changed, as they always do, and Portland turned gold and red, then gray and bright again, the city cycling through time as Emily and Atlas walked each day together. Their steps fell into an easy rhythm, side by side through the neighborhood, sometimes quiet, sometimes in conversation with old friends who now waved and stopped to chat. The air was brisk and alive, the world no longer a place Emily passed through, but a place she inhabited fully, scars and all. Atlas had become a fixture in the community, wearing his blue therapy dog bandana, his noble head held high. Children called out to him from across the street. Neighbors greeted Emily by name, often stopping to share a story or ask for advice about their own senior pets. The girl who once felt invisible now walked with confidence, her loyal companion never more than a step away. On a bright spring afternoon, the local animal shelter hosted its largest event yet, Senior Paws Day. Colorful banners fluttered, the scent of grilled food drifted on the breeze, and laughter rose above the hum of conversation. Emily stood near the entrance with Megan and Ben at her side, Atlas sitting at attention, a proud ambassador for every animal waiting for a home. The shelter staff buzzed with excitement. News had spread of Emily and Atlas's journey, inspiring donations and a wave of interest in adopting older dogs. All morning, people arrived in steady streams, some drawn by the newsletter's story, others remembering Emily's gentle talks or the hopeful look in Atlas's eyes as he comforted a frightened child at a previous event. Emily wandered the park, introducing Atlas to newcomers, hugging old friends, and quietly encouraging hesitant visitors. She saw an older couple meet a 12-year-old spaniel for the first time, saw a young boy teach his father how to pet a trembling chihuahua. At the edge of the crowd, she watched Ben kneeling beside a nervous dog and a hopeful family, patiently guiding them through the first tentative moments of connection. Megan, clipboard in hand, beamed with pride as she called out the numbers. "That's our 17th adoption today, Mom. I've never seen so many happy endings in one place." Emily looked around at the swirling scene. Dogs napping in the grass, children running, laughter ringing. The ache that once filled her chest had become something softer, a grateful fullness that made every breath feel like a gift. She knelt beside Atlas, rubbing his ears as he watched a puppy tumble in the grass. "You did this, you know," she whispered. "You helped me find my way back, and now you're helping everyone else too." As the afternoon faded into the soft blue of early evening, Emily stood on a small stage, Ben and Megan at her side, Atlas sitting faithfully by her feet. The crowd quieted as she took the microphone, her heart racing, not with fear, but with an eagerness to share what she had learned. "I used to believe that life's losses left you broken in ways that could never be mended," Emily began, her voice carrying clear and gentle. But Atlas taught me that healing is a journey, a series of small, sometimes painful steps that lead you to places you never thought you'd go. Every scar we carry tells a story, and every new day gives us a chance to write a new chapter. She glanced at Megan and Ben, then looked down at Atlas, who gazed up at her with unwavering loyalty. When we open our hearts again, despite the fear, despite the memories, we discover that love isn't about replacing what's gone. It's about honoring the past while giving ourselves and others a chance for something new. That's what second chances are all about. There was applause, quiet at first, then swelling as people stood and cheered. Emily felt her cheeks flush, not from embarrassment but from the warmth of being truly seen. Afterward, families gathered to take photos and volunteers shared stories of the dogs who had found homes that day. Megan hugged her mother tightly. "You're a bridge, Mom. You help people believe they can heal too." Emily smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "Atlas showed me how," she replied. "All I did was follow his lead." As the sun dipped behind the city, Emily and Atlas took a last slow walk around the park. The world felt wide and beautiful, open with possibility. She watched Atlas play with a new puppy, the two dogs tumbling in the grass, the older teaching the younger with patience and joy. Emily realized that her legacy was not just the story of one woman's grief and healing, but the ripple of hope she and Atlas had sent into the world. She had become a mentor to new volunteers, a quiet guide for those just starting the journey through loss and renewal. Her days were full, not only with laughter and activity, but with the deep satisfaction of making a difference. She learned to wear her scars with pride, reminders of all she had survived, proof that hope could always find her, even when she thought she was lost for good. The emptiness she once felt had been replaced by gratitude for each morning, each dog adopted, each hand held through sorrow. And so Emily walked home with Atlas that evening, the city's lights winking on, her heart peaceful and brave. She knew there would still be hard days. Loss was part of loving, after all, but she was no longer afraid. With Atlas by her side, she faced each new dawn with an open heart, believing that no matter what, hope would always return, sometimes in the gentle eyes of a loyal dog.